Thanks, Michael. So I'm both the chair and also a speaker in this session, so I'm wearing two hats, and I think I've probably got one of the hardest sessions to chair because I'm standing between you and happy hour. So let's hope we can get through this quickly. And I'd like to thank Thermo King Bus Australia for sponsoring this session. Your support is very much appreciated. So bus rapid transit, we all know what it is. Put simply, it is like a rubber-wheeled train system operated by buses that have the flexibility to travel on and off a closed or dedicated public transport corridor. BRT, BRT Lite and Bus Priority are real options to improve public transport around the world. And in Australia, we've had an interesting history of BRT, starting with the O-Bahn in Adelaide and through to arguably one of the world's best busway systems, namely the Brisbane Busway, which I'll talk about in a while. And I think it's important, as Michael's explained, from a UITP perspective, that we clearly advise and educate decision makers on what BRT is, what are the variations, what are its advantages, and based on today's session, what is going on around the rest of the world and in Australia. So today we're going to hear about Australia, New Zealand, Malaysia and Korea in regard to BRT in those countries. And I'll begin this session by providing a broad overview of what's going on around the world and then looking at the Brisbane busways in particular. So now I turn to put my speaker hat on. Oh. My presentation has already gone all the way through to Brisbane, and you're getting a snapshot of... Sorry about that. Okay, so I'm here to give you an overview of trends in BRT, both a global perspective and then looking at the Brisbane busways. So moving first to BRT and bus rapid transit, some of the main characteristics of bus rapid transit, and I know you're quite a lot of you in the room are already familiar with it, but I'll go over it in some just high-level detail. Certainly there's a high average speed of up to 20 to 25 kilometres per hour in terms of service provision. High-frequency services with trunk and feeder routes. Stations with off-board fare collection to reduce boarding and alighting delay related to paying the driver. Station platforms that are level with the bus floor to reduce boarding and alighting delay caused by steps, for example. High-quality metro-style stops and bus priority at intersections to avoid intersection delay. Now, the first BRT system in the world was invented or implemented in a place called Curitiba in 1974. And most of the elements of that system have become associated with what we know as BRT today. And they were first suggested by Curitiba's Lord Mayor, Jamie Lerner. And initially just a series of dedicated bus lanes in the centre of a major arterial road. In 1980, the Curitiba system added a feeder bus network and interzonal connections, and in the 1990s, introduced off-board fare collection in closed stations and platform-level boarding. So really the system in Curitiba encapsulates what has now become BRT around the world. In terms of numbers, since the inception of BRT in Curitiba, the concept has been adopted across the world with increasing popularity. Latin America continues to be the world's largest or leader in terms of passengers per day, but there has been a rapid rise in the number of cities implementing BRT systems across the world, particularly in Asia. And in terms of pure numbers, over the world there is approximately 380 BRT corridors, 4,500 kilometres of dedicated infrastructure, 7,000 stations and over 30 million passengers per day. In terms of some examples of BRT around the globe, I'd like to highlight some in Asia because it's certainly relevant to this region, and I'd like to point to the example of Guangzhou. Guangzhou has over 22.5 kilometres of dedicated busway. Over 800,000 passengers use the system per day on a single corridor, which equates to around 27,400 passengers per peak hour per direction, which is quite a phenomenal amount. And just from a UITP perspective, they did win the Sustainable Transport Award in 2011 for their efforts in building a BRT system. And here's an example of the median busway, which is a common element of most BRT systems, and that is in Guangzhou. And importantly, probably one of the most notable aspects of Guangzhou and its BRT system is that it looks like a metro in many respects, with elements of its system design and user interface. So its station entrances, for example, are very metro style. Its platform doors, which are designed to improve safety, are also quite similar to metro systems, particularly in Asia. And the platforms are very wide, allowing for good passenger circulation, and the passenger displays and information are often in real time. Another global example is the Istanbul BRT system, which again you can see on the overhead is located in the median strip in the middle of the freeway. It carries up to 100,000 passengers per day and is again a very successful example. In addition to the Asian and Latin American examples that I've referred to, BRT is also on the rise in Europe. But as the Europeans like to do things a little bit differently, it is called by another name. And that is BHLS, or buses with a high level of service. And in Europe, the situation prior to the implementation of BHLS in many cities could be described as having a high level of private motorisation and congestion on main roads, decreased punctuality and commercial speed of the bus networks, and a lack of capacity in the radial and tangential directions in those bus networks. But some of the BHLS tools and measures that were implemented in a number of cities to address these issues and that are typical of BRT measures more generally include network hierarchies with BHLS lines and feeder lines, greater accessibility with shorter headways, greater commercial speed and punctuality, principally due to bus priority measures and less stops, greater connectivity, including time and space coordination with metro, tram and rail networks, which is an important part of the total multimodal solution. Better information, including real-time information at stops, on board and mobile apps, as well as quality marketing and PR, particularly to make it easier for occasional users to use the system. And I'd like to quickly turn to the issue of right-of-way, and that is something that really defines the different levels of BHLS in Europe, or BRT. And you obviously have the full suite of full segregation at the top, which is where you have complete separation between the busway and other road infrastructure. Below that you have partial segregation, which typically includes priority at crossroads as well as some access protection throughout the route. And then you have bus line dedication, which may have flow or contraflow lines during particular times of the day, full-time or peak time lanes, as well as bus-only lanes that can include taxis and bikes. And here's some examples of BHLS from Europe. I won't go through them all in detail, but some probably more famous ones in France include the TVM in Paris, and in Netherlands, the Zode Tangent in Amsterdam. So why would you want to invest in BRT or BHLS when planning and procuring a public transport solution? Well, there are a number of advantages that policymakers could consider. Full BRT, as I've just described, is independent of road traffic, thereby increasing efficiencies. BRT can involve lower investment in funding and financing infrastructure than rail. BRT involves cheaper rolling stock procurement, generally speaking. Commercial speed can be nearly as fast as metro if there's no intersections. There can be more flexibility with the desired solution depending on the level of priority. And there are construction stages that are possible with future conversion to other modes such as LRT. And corridor capacity per hour can actually be greater than light rail in certain circumstances. And just on that last point, I'd like to refer to a diagram which highlights corridor capacities per hour using different modes of transport. And as we can see, for a BRT double lane solution, these can achieve greater corridor flows than the equivalent LRT line. However, corridor flow ultimately is dependent on the particular configuration. But this slide demonstrates that BRT can be quite competitive. I'm moving through these slides quite quickly, so I apologise if I'm going fast, but I would now like to go from the global perspective that I've just talked about to Australia and the specific example of the Brisbane Busways. And I'd like to acknowledge the assistance of Brisbane Transport in preparing this presentation, and they've provided a lot of information. In terms of the content, I'd like to just go over the Brisbane Busway network. I'd like to look at the infrastructure. I'd like to specifically go over the service design flexibility, which is one of the successes of the BRT system, and then make some conclusions. In terms of the busway network itself, in Brisbane it's very extensive. It covers the north, east and southeast parts of Brisbane with planned extensions indicated on the overhead. It currently has 29 kilometres of dedicated busways, 24 bus stations, numerous tunnels and viaducts, a tunnel under the city centre, as well as several access points to and from the general road network. And the first section of busway was opened in 2000 and has been progressively extended. I'd now like to show you some images of the busway infrastructure and stops. So as noted before, the busway has 29 kilometres of dedicated bus-only roadways separated from general road traffic. And here is a great image which shows you the separation of the infrastructure from the general road traffic. And when I travel on the busways in Brisbane, it's certainly a good feeling when you are on the busway to pass by the congested road networks, and it's a visible sign of the success of the infrastructure. In terms of tunnels, the busway network has also over 4 kilometres of tunnels, with the longest tunnel being 640 kilometres. There's also numerous viaducts on the busway network, which is one of the unique features of the system and owes in part to the specific geography that we're dealing with in Brisbane. A particular innovation of the busway design is what's known as the Green Bridge, seen here on the PowerPoint. And this is a multimodal piece of infrastructure that caters for bus, pedestrians and cyclists in terms of them being able to access the University of Queensland. And so again, that's another success point of the busway network in Brisbane in its ability to integrate other modes into the design of the system. And probably one of the most distinctive elements of the busway system itself is the stations. And some of the high-profile stations are almost railway-like in their nature, and they're also quite large, having passing lanes to allow a mixture of stopping and express services. And they also provide a quality environment in which to transfer between services. And the Cultural Centre station in Brisbane on South Bank has become the busiest transfer point between services in the entire South East Queensland network across the rail, bus and ferry networks. So it's busier than the central main station in terms of transfers, which is quite remarkable. Now, we talk a lot about the importance of transport and land use planning integration. It's often said they're different sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. And I'd say that the Brisbane Busways is an example of great transport and land use planning integration. For example, stations are integrated with major land uses such as hospitals, universities and sports complexes. And here we can see an example of the Mater Hill station with a major hospital complex. For your cricket fans out there, there's the Woolloongabba station, which obviously services the Gabba. There's the 8 Mile Plains Park and Ride station. There's an example of the King George Square Underground station, which services a shopping precinct and a commuter precinct. Similarly, the Queen Street Underground station. So you can see that the design of the busway system itself is quite integrated with the surrounding land uses. The busway system has also been designed with modal integration in mind, as well as transport and land use integration. And we can see an example on the overhead of the Roma Street bus rail integration. Here you can see a picture of the integration at Platform 2, which serves both bus and rail. There is a dedicated Platform 1, which serves bus only, and then there are Platforms 3 to 10, which serve rail at Roma Street. And interestingly, the construction of the interchange facility involved the removal of a rail track to facilitate the busway infrastructure. So it's not often you see the removal of rail to facilitate bus, but this is an example of that. And to not leave sport out of the picture, there's actually some examples of recreational and transport integration involved in the Brisbane Busway. And this is an example of a covered section of the busway that protects the busway from passing golf balls overhead. And it's part of the busway network that passes through a major golf course. As I mentioned before, one of the key successes of the Brisbane Busway has been its service design flexibility. Busways can provide the opportunity to operate a combination of traditional rail and bus service design types and deliver direct service benefits to a much wider area than the actual busway corridor itself. So for example, the South Eastern Busway has 222 routes, travelling both on and off the busway and servicing a large catchment. Accordingly, creative service design is one of the keys to maximising the benefits of busway infrastructure. Another key aspect of the success of the busways is the mixture of stopping patterns that serve different markets, including all stations, limited stop express services and non-stop services on the busway. And you can see on the overhead that the schematic shows the blue all station stopping services, the the green limited stopping services and the orange non-stop services. Now this can provide for faster journeys for most passengers. It can avoid congestion at stations and can maximise passenger attractiveness and catchment potential. So I'd just like to end there by summarising that it's important that we work to encourage quite lateral approaches to public transport policy development when we're thinking about particular public transport solutions. And we need to look at the ability of busways to offer a contemporary 21st century solution to public transport mobility issues. And I think from the Brisbane Busways example, we can see that a well-designed busway system coupled with a creative customer-focused network design can transform a bus network. It can facilitate a service provision that combines the advantages of rail and the flexibility of bus, that delivers metro-like frequencies in a low-density urban environment, and that can successfully perform the heavy-duty trunk distribution function that is traditionally undertaken by rail. So that concludes my presentation that covers both global perspectives of BRT as well as a specific example of the Brisbane Busways. So thank you.